A twisted love triangle where no one can be trusted. What happens when betrayal leads to a brutal execution in the most unexpected place? Dive into the shocking story of a parking garage murder that reveals a web of lies, manipulation, and a chilling betrayal. Stay with us, because the truth will leave you speechless. The air smelled faintly of exhaust. A stale mixture of gasoline and damp concrete hung in the cold, dark space. Echoes of footsteps reverberated through the underground parking garage, bouncing off the concrete pillars and metal walls. It was late. Far too late for this place to still be busy. Yet there he was. Sam had parked his car a few spots away from the elevator. His footsteps quickened, echoing louder as he approached the exit. He was nervous. His palms were clammy. His heart beat faster. His eyes scanned the area, always darting, always looking over his shoulder. He could feel someone watching him. The parking garage was almost empty. Just the occasional flickering light above his head. And the oppressive silence. It was uncomfortable. Suddenly, the hum of the overhead lights grew louder. The sound of a door slamming shut echoed in the distance. Sam froze. His breath caught. Then, a car engine roared to life behind him. A single bright headlight pierced through the dark. It was too much. The engine sputtered, then revved again. Closer now. Someone was coming. He turned to see who. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. It was a woman. Her face was hard to read. Her eyes cold, distant. But Sam knew her. He had known her for years. Her name was Lily. Lily, the woman who had stolen his heart, broken it, and twisted it. She was the reason he was here. The reason he was terrified. Behind her, another figure emerged. A man. Mark. His best friend. His betrayer. Sam's stomach turned. His head spun. It was all too much. Lily had told him she was done with Mark. That she was over him. That she wanted Sam. But now, here they were. Together. His mind raced. Lily took a few more steps forward. The tension between them was palpable. The air thickened with the unspoken words. Sam's voice caught in his throat. He couldn't speak. He wasn't sure if he wanted to. Mark stepped forward, his face a mask of anger and hurt. You didn't think we'd find out, did you? Mark's voice was low, a growl of rage. Sam's legs felt like jelly. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. But here it was. The moment had arrived. And it was worse than he could have imagined. Mark's eyes burned with fury. The flickering light above them cast strange shadows on his face. Lily stood still, her gaze fixed on the ground, her lips tight. Sam's throat tightened. It felt like the walls were closing in. The air was thick now, suffocating. Sam's breath quickened. His palms were slick with sweat. Mark's voice broke the silence again, sharp like a blade. You thought you could take her from me? After everything. He took a step forward, and Sam's body tensed. Mark, please. Sam's voice was barely a whisper. It's not like that. But Mark didn't care. The anger in his eyes was too much. Lily, still silent, slowly backed away. Sam's eyes followed her, but she didn't look at him. Not once. He felt a sharp pang in his chest. The betrayal stung, deeper than he expected. Mark stepped closer, the clinking of his boots against the concrete echoing in the silence. Sam could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Then Mark raised his hand. It was too fast, too sudden. A sharp metallic sound sliced through the air. A knife. Sam froze, his breath caught in his throat. The light reflected off the steel blade. Mark's grip tightened on the handle. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. Mark, don't, Sam's voice cracked, but it was already too late. Mark lunged. The blade flashed through the air. Everything happened in an instant. A sharp pain pierced Sam's side. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground. The world around him blurred. The cold concrete felt like ice against his skin. Blood soaked through his shirt. A wet warmth spread through his body. Mark stood over him, the knife still dripping red.
Lily was gone now.
She had turned, walking away, her footsteps echoing in the distance. Sam could barely move. His vision swam. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Mark looked down at him, his face unreadable. "This is your fault," he muttered, as though the words were for himself, not Sam. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant hum of a car engine and the fading echo of footsteps. Sam's vision blurred, the edges of the world fading into darkness. The pain was overwhelming, but it was the coldness that really got to him. The chill in the air seemed to seep into his bones, draining the warmth from his body. He tried to lift his hand, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. His fingers barely twitched. Mark stood above him, his breath heavy and ragged. The knife glinted in his hand, still dripping. Sam could hear the faint sound of Mark's footsteps retreating. It was surreal. The world felt like it was spinning, pulling him deeper into nothingness. A muffled thud echoed from somewhere far away. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. The sound of a car door closing. The garage grew quieter. The cold concrete beneath Sam seemed to grow colder, more unforgiving. Lily was gone. Mark was gone. Only the remnants of a shattered triangle remained. The silence was deafening. Sam's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. It was hard to breathe. The world around him felt more distant, as though it didn't matter anymore. But somewhere, deep inside, he clung to the memory of her face. Lily, the woman who had torn his world apart. And Mark, his best friend, his betrayer. They were both gone now. But it didn't feel like closure. It felt like the start of something worse. Sam's eyelids fluttered. His heart hammered weakly in his chest. Everything was fading.
The pain.
The cold. The bitter taste of betrayal. And then nothing. The parking garage, the dim lights, and the echo of footsteps all disappeared. There was only darkness. An overwhelming, consuming darkness. No more sounds. No more feelings. Just the cold. The darkness pressed in around him, suffocating. It felt endless, like a weight that crushed him from every side. Sam didn't know how long he had been there. Time no longer mattered. Everything had slipped away. And then a sound broke through the void. A faint scraping noise, like metal dragging across concrete. Sam's eyes fluttered open, but the world was still a blur. His body felt heavy, his limbs unresponsive. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. Then, a figure appeared in his hazy vision. A shadow moving swiftly through the darkness. It was hard to focus. Sam's head swam in and out of clarity. The figure stopped near him. He could feel the presence now, looming over him. The faintest glimmer of a face appeared, eyes wide with uncertainty. "Sam?" The voice was soft, a whisper almost lost in the air. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't Lily. It was someone else. Someone he didn't expect. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone who shouldn't have seen this. A hand reached down, tentative at first, as if unsure if Sam was still alive. But the touch was warm. It wasn't the cold of the garage. It wasn't the ice in his veins. The warmth was a shock. It reminded him of something he couldn't place. Something long forgotten. "Sam, come on," the voice urged. "You've got to hold on." It was familiar, but he couldn't place it. A tug at his sleeve. The warmth grew stronger. Then more hands joined in, lifting him,
supporting him.
Sam's head spun, but the dizziness wasn't as overpowering anymore. The dark blur above him began to clear. The garage was still there. The cold concrete. The flickering lights. But there was something different now. A glimmer of light where it had once been so dark. The figure, whoever they were, kept speaking. "Stay with me. You can't die here. Not like this." Sam's body was a lead weight, but his mind began to fight. The world was still spinning, but it felt like he was being pulled out of the darkness, pulled back from the edge. The warmth around him was constant. He focused on it. The voice. The hands. It was the only thing real now. And somehow, that warmth gave him something to hold on to. A flicker of hope. The hands tightened around him, pulling him closer, supporting his fragile form. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as though the figure knew how fragile Sam was. His mind was foggy, but the sensation of being held, of being cared for, broke through the haze. Sam's lips parted, but no sound came out. He wanted to speak, to ask who this person was, but his body refused to obey. A low hum filled the air now, soft but persistent, like an engine idling in the distance. It was a reminder that the world around him still existed, despite everything. He could feel the presence of the person beside him, moving with purpose. They didn't speak anymore. They just focused on getting him out of there. The cold concrete scraped against his skin as they dragged him, step by step. The metallic taste of blood lingered in his mouth. He could feel it trickling down his side. But the pain was dulling, becoming more distant with each movement. Every breath was a struggle, but somehow he still took them. The hands didn't let go.
And that was all that mattered now.
The world was a blur of motion and sound. Footsteps, quick, deliberate, echoed around them. The faint glow of distant lights blurred in Sam's vision as they neared the exit. The figure guiding him didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. They were determined. Finally, Sam's body hit something soft, a seat, a car seat. He wasn't sure how long they'd been walking or how far they'd gone, but the transition from concrete to softness felt like a small victory. The air outside the parking garage felt different. It was colder, but there was a sharpness to it, crisp and alive, like the world had somehow moved on. The figure slid into the driver's seat next to him, their breath heavy with exhaustion. Sam felt the car rumble to life. A low hum beneath him as the vehicle began to move, slowly at first. He didn't know where they were going or who had come to his rescue. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sam allowed himself to close his eyes. The car was moving. The world outside was still there. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. He didn't know how. But for the first time since he'd been stabbed, he felt like he wasn't completely alone. Maybe that was enough for now. The car moved steadily, the hum of the engine a constant, grounding presence. The streets outside blurred past, the world moving on while Sam felt frozen in time. His mind wandered, drifting between moments of clarity and disorientation. He was aware of the pressure in his side, the slow drip of blood soaking through his shirt, but it didn't seem to matter as much now. The warmth of the car, the gentle motion, was a stark contrast to the cold, empty garage he'd left behind. Who was the person beside him? Sam's lips parted again, his voice barely a rasp.
Who?
The person didn't answer at first, but Sam could feel their eyes on him. Then, a soft, almost soothing voice filled the space between them. It's okay. Just hold on a little longer. There was a sense of urgency, but also something deeper, something that spoke of familiarity, of a history that Sam couldn't place. He blinked, his mind still clouded, but he couldn't deny the pull of recognition. Something about this voice, it stirred something inside him. Something buried deep within the fog of his memories. The car moved through the streets with a sense of purpose, but time had become a blur. Everything felt distant, almost unreal. Sam could feel his body sinking deeper into the seat, the weight of exhaustion pulling at him. The person driving, whoever they were, seemed intent on keeping him alive. But for how long? His mind was racing, flashes of Lily and Mark fighting for dominance in his thoughts. The cold, harsh betrayal. The sharp pain in his side.
But none of that mattered now.
The focus had shifted. Survival. Sam's breathing became shallow as he tried to stay awake, to hold onto whatever was left of the moment. The voice spoke again, softer this time, as if reading his thoughts. "You're going to make it. We just need to get you help." Sam couldn't respond. The words were lodged in his throat, tangled with the confusion swirling in his mind. But there was something in that voice. Something comforting. His eyelids fluttered again, and he could feel the darkness threatening to take him. But he fought it. For some reason, he needed to stay awake. He needed to know who had saved him. The car continued its journey, winding through the city streets. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of sirens grew louder. But Sam was barely aware of them. All he could think about was the voice, the person beside him, and the strange, inexplicable sense that this was only the beginning of something much darker. The sirens grew louder, their wail cutting through the night air. But they felt far away, distant, like Sam was floating in some in-between world. The car sped on, its headlights slicing through the night, casting long shadows on the road ahead. Sam's body felt like a dead weight, every inch of him aching, but he couldn't quite bring himself to care. He was drifting. The warmth of the car, the steady hum of the engine, were the only things keeping him tethered to this reality. The voice spoke again, soft but insistent. "You're still with me. Stay awake. Just a little longer." Sam's eyes fluttered, barely able to keep them open. Who was this person? His mind was too clouded to fully remember, but there was a thread of recognition, a fleeting image he couldn't quite grasp. The faintest hint of a memory danced at the edge of his consciousness. A voice, a face. But it was slipping away, like water through his fingers. "Just hold on, Sam." The voice was so familiar, so full of warmth and urgency. But it wasn't enough to anchor him. Sam's eyelids grew heavy, and he could feel the pull of sleep, the darkness calling to him again. For a moment, it felt like he could let go, like everything would be okay if he just gave in. But something stopped him. A jolt. The car swerved suddenly, jerking to the side. Sam's body slammed against the door, pain shooting through him. His breath caught and he gasped. It wasn't the pain that startled him. It was the feeling of the car moving, shifting, like someone was forcing it off course. "Hold on." The voice broke through his confusion, sharp and frantic. He felt the grip of a hand on his arm, strong and desperate. The car veered again, this time slowing down, its tires screeching against the asphalt. Sam's eyes struggled to focus, his vision spinning, but he could see it now. A figure ahead. A figure in the middle of the road. A figure standing still, unmoving. The car slammed to a halt. The world stopped. Sam's heart raced in his chest as the screeching of the tires faded into silence. He could barely comprehend what was happening. The figure ahead remained still, its face hidden in the shadow, but Sam could sense the danger. The hand on his arm tightened. "Stay down," the voice said, low and urgent. Sam tried to move, to do anything, but his body was too weak, too broken. The figure took a step forward, then another. The air around them crackled with tension. The stillness was unnerving. And in that moment, Sam realized something. The game wasn't over. Not yet. The darkness, the cold, the pain, it was all part of something bigger. Something darker. And it wasn't finished with him. Not by a long shot. The figure in the road didn't move any closer, but it was as if they were daring the car to make a move, to break the silence. Sam could feel his breath slowing, his chest rising and falling in labored gasps. His mind was spinning, his thoughts crashing together like waves. Who was this person? And why did they seem so calm? The hand on his arm was still there, firm and unyielding. It felt like the only thing keeping him grounded. But the car didn't move. The figure didn't speak. The air inside the car was thick with anticipation, a suffocating tension that Sam couldn't shake. The figure ahead didn't flinch, didn't budge an inch. It was as though they were waiting for something, waiting for them to make the next move. The silence stretched on. Sam could hear his heartbeat, loud in his ears, like a drum echoing through his skull. Every instinct told him to look away, to avoid whatever was coming. But he couldn't. His body wouldn't obey. He couldn't turn his head. The figure took another step forward, the movement slow and deliberate. Then another. Sam's breath hitched. A chill ran down his spine. The streetlights flickered in the distance. A soft breeze ruffled the edges of the car, carrying with it the scent of something sharp. Something metallic. Something dangerous. The voice beside him broke the silence again. "Stay down, Sam."
It was urgent now. The calmness gone.
The figure didn't stop. It didn't show fear. In fact, it felt like the figure was feeding off the tension, drawing power from the situation. Sam could feel his pulse quicken, his heart racing, his skin prickling with unease. The person beside him, whoever they were, seemed to be preparing for something. The figure ahead stopped, just standing there. And then, without warning, a flash of movement.
Quick, sharp.
The door swung open with a violent force. Sam's body jolted as the cold night air rushed in. But before he could process what was happening, a hand grabbed his shoulder. The person beside him was pulling him out of the car, dragging him. "No." Sam's voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp. But it didn't matter. The cold air hit his skin, sharp and biting. His legs barely held him as he was yanked from the car. The world spun wildly, but he could see it now. The figure standing ahead, and the glint of something silver in their hand. A knife. It gleamed under the dim streetlights, reflecting the eerie stillness of the moment. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. The hands on him tightened. There was no escape now. The cold, the metal, the figure in front of him. Everything was closing in. And this time, Sam knew. It was over. The figure in front of Sam took a step forward, their shadow swallowing the faint light of the street lamp above. The knife glinted menacingly, its edge reflecting a cold, merciless sheen. Sam's breath quickened, but his body remained frozen, as though it had betrayed him. The hand on his shoulder tightened, pulling him further from the safety of the car, dragging him toward the figure. The cold air felt like ice against his skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the car he had just left behind. The figure's eyes were dark, empty, but there was something in them, something that made Sam's stomach churn. He could barely process it, his thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. The hand on his shoulder, strong and unyielding, jerked him forward once more, the pressure forcing him to take a step toward the knife. His mind screamed, but his body didn't respond.
He was too weak.
Too broken. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. There was only the sound of Sam's ragged breath and the low hum of the night surrounding them. The person beside him, who had been holding him, guiding him, stepped back slightly, their grip loosening just enough to allow Sam to see them more clearly. For the first time, their face came into focus. And Sam's heart skipped a beat. It was Lily. Her eyes, dark with something Sam couldn't quite name, locked onto his. Her expression was cold, empty. And then it hit him, the truth. The realization. Lily. She was behind this all along. The betrayal ran deeper than he had ever imagined. She wasn't here to save him. She had always been a part of the game. The knife glinted in her hand, steady, poised. Sam's blood ran cold. His chest tightened, his vision blurred again. Lily's lips parted, but her voice came out low, almost a whisper, as though she were savoring the words. "Did you really think it would be any other way, Sam?" Her words felt like a slap in the face. The world around him seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them, locked in this twisted moment. The knife in her hand trembled ever so slightly, a subtle sign of tension in her otherwise calm demeanor. And then she moved. The blade cut through the air, so fast, so precise. Sam didn't have time to react. It wasn't the sharp pain he expected, though. It was the coldness of the metal pressed against his skin. The ice-cold, unfeeling presence of betrayal. Sam's vision spun. But just before the world went black, Lily's voice cut through again. We both knew this was how it would end. The blade pressed harder. And in that final moment, Sam realized he had never truly been out of the game. He had always been a pawn. The pressure of the blade against Sam's skin intensified, but it wasn't a cut that pierced him. It was the crushing weight of realization, the truth that had been hidden from him all along. Lily's eyes were locked onto his with a chilling calm, the faintest twitch of a smile curling at the corners of her lips. It was like everything had been leading up to this. A moment where he saw clearly, where everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, shattered into pieces. Sam's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. His body was numb, but his mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of reality. The betrayal was raw. It felt like his heart had been ripped out, leaving him hollow. Lily wasn't just a bystander. She wasn't the victim she'd appeared to be. She had been in control all along. And Sam had never seen it. Her voice broke the silence again, low and cold. You thought I was your salvation, Sam. But I was always the storm. The words sank into him, each one twisting the knife deeper. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to focus.
He needed to see it.
He needed to understand. But it wasn't just Lily in front of him. The figure behind him, the one who had pulled him from the car, the one who had kept him alive long enough for this moment to happen, stepped forward. It was Mark. Mark, standing there with a look of quiet resignation in his eyes. Sam's chest constricted. His heart hammered painfully in his ribs. Mark had been a part of this too. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. Lily and Mark, both of them had played him from the very beginning. There was no escape. No redemption. No way out. Mark's voice, low and steady, cut through the deafening silence. We all have our roles, Sam. You were never going to be the hero in this story. Sam couldn't process the words. His mind was too fragmented, the shock of the truth too overwhelming. The darkness in front of him pressed in, suffocating, but he couldn't look away. Mark and Lily were both in on it. The twisted game they'd played, with him as the unwitting pawn, had been a trap from the start. Sam had thought there was love, that there was something real in the chaos between them. But it had all been a lie. The cold steel of the knife was still pressed against his skin, but it wasn't the weapon he feared most now. It was the weight of their betrayal. And in that moment, as the truth suffocated him, Sam realized something else. The end had already come. There was no fight left in him. The finality of it all took hold, dragging him under. And just as the cold, dark world closed in completely, Sam felt the last of his strength slip away. The game was over. The cold grip of unconsciousness slowly began to claim Sam. His body went limp in their hands, but it wasn't the absence of life that hit him most. It was the suffocating weight of the betrayal, of the twisted realization that everything he had trusted, every choice he had made, had been part of their plan. Mark and Lily stood over him, their presence oppressive. The world around him was fading, a dull blur of sounds and shapes, but one thing lingered in the periphery of his fading consciousness, the soft click of the knife being sheathed. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Sam's mind fought to stay awake, but it was a losing battle. Is he gone? Mark's voice was low, almost distant, but there was no emotion in it. Lily didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, watching Sam, her eyes unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice quiet and final. For now, she sounded so calm, so composed, as if this had all been inevitable. As if Sam had been nothing but a blip in their much bigger plan. Mark shifted, looking away, his expression darkening for a moment. But then he glanced back at Lily. We need to go. It's done. Sam's chest still rose and fell, shallow, but the blood loss was taking its toll. His body wasn't reacting. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, but he was still there, hanging on by the thinnest thread. He could hear their footsteps retreating, echoing in the empty street, their voices low and indistinct. But he couldn't understand their words. He was slipping away. The weight of his body pressing against the cold ground seemed to pull him deeper into darkness. The light above flickered one last time. And then nothing. Silence. No footsteps. No voices. Just the chilling emptiness of the night. The parking garage, now eerily quiet, felt like a tomb. The echoes of everything that had happened seemed to linger in the air, fading, but never truly gone. The last of Sam's awareness melted away, leaving only the remnants of a life he thought he understood. But the game had never been his to win. Not from the start. And now it was over. In the end, all that remained was the cold, harsh silence. The twisted truth that had driven everything forward. And the unspoken promise that, for Mark and Lily, this was only the beginning. Time had passed. Sam's body lay still, his chest barely rising with shallow breaths that seemed like echoes of life rather than the real thing. It wasn't the darkness of the night that consumed him. It was the finality of everything that had led to this point. The betrayal. The manipulation. The game that Sam had never understood until it was far too late. The parking garage had become a graveyard, holding the remnants of everything that had died within him.
His trust.
His hope. His chance at redemption. But somewhere in the distance, the faintest sound of footsteps echoed. It was hard to tell if they were real or imagined, a trick of the mind on the verge of giving in to the cold darkness that had claimed him. Then, a flash of light broke through the gloom. A car's headlights. They cut through the night like a blade, stopping just short of where Sam lay, unmoving. The door opened with a soft click. The figure who emerged wasn't Mark or Lily. It was someone new. A man, dressed in a dark coat, his face hidden by the shadow of his hood. He moved quickly, his steps purposeful, as if he already knew where to go, where to find Sam. Sam's eyes fluttered open, though it was more instinct than awareness. His vision was a haze, the world around him barely more than blurred shapes. The man knelt beside him, his gaze assessing, quick and trained.
He didn't hesitate.
With a swift motion, he checked Sam's pulse, pressing 2 fingers to his neck.
A beat.
Another. Sam's heart still beat, faint but steady. The man exhaled slowly, relieved, but his face remained impassive. Without a word, he pulled something from his pocket. A small syringe. It glinted in the dim light. A needle. A sedative, maybe. Sam's fading consciousness fought against it, but he couldn't move. His mind felt like it was slipping, drowning in a dark fog. The needle slid into his arm, cold and sharp. His body tensed, but then the fog deepened. The figure watched him one last time, then stood, moving back toward the car. Before the darkness fully took him, Sam's last thought was a question. Who is this person?
And why had they come now?
But it was too late to know. The darkness consumed him, and the figure drove away, leaving the parking garage empty once more. When Sam woke again, it wasn't the harsh light of the parking garage that greeted him, but the soft, sterile glow of a hospital room. The familiar hum of machines and the smell of antiseptic filled the air, and for a moment, he couldn't understand how he had gotten here. His head throbbed, his body ached, but the pain was distant now, softened by the numbness of the drugs still working their way through his system. He tried to move, but his limbs were heavy, uncooperative. The remnants of the sedative still lingered in his bloodstream, keeping him tethered to the bed. The room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of the heart monitor and the faint rustling of paper outside the door. Sam's mind swirled, piecing together the events that had led him here. Lily.
Mark.
The knife. The cold betrayal. Had it all been a dream? A nightmare? The sharp edge of reality cut through his thoughts. It hadn't been a dream. But now he was here.
Alive.
For how long, though? Who had saved him? who had found him in that garage, lying on the edge of death. The door opened slowly, and a figure stepped inside. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't Lily. It was someone new. A woman, tall, with short dark hair, and a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through Sam. She looked familiar, but he couldn't place her. "Who are you?" Sam croaked, his voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. The woman didn't smile. She didn't offer any words of comfort. Instead, she looked at him, cold and calculating, as if weighing the truth in her mind. "Someone who's been watching," she said simply, her voice even. "You were never meant to be a part of this. But you're here now." Sam stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Who were they? Mark and Lily. What was their game? He asked, his voice growing weaker. The woman's lips twitched, but she didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer, her gaze still unyielding. The game's never over. It's just waiting for the right moment to start again. And with that, she turned and left, leaving Sam with more questions than answers. But as the darkness crept in again, Sam understood one thing. He wasn't free. The game had just shifted, and it was waiting for him to play once more. This time, there would be no escape.